The year was 1887, and the land was a hard-bitten, sun-scorched stretch of territory that God seemed to have made in anger and then forgotten. This was the West, not the one in the dime novels, but the real one. It was a place of vast, aching distances, where the sky was a relentless, pale blue eye that baked the ground into a cracked, red-brown puzzle. The mountains were not green and friendly. They were jagged purple wounds against the horizon, sharp enough to cut the clouds that dared to drift too close. The wind was the only thing that moved with purpose, a dry, whispering ghost that carried the scent of dust, juniper, and the deep, cold loneliness of stone. It was a land that did not offer comfort. It demanded survival, and it respected nothing but strength. It would break a man or forge him into something as hard and unyielding as the rock beneath his feet. In this land lived Cale Red Bear. He was a man forged. He was Apache, a warrior carved from the canyons and mesas he called home. He stood tall, with a breadth of shoulder that spoke of a life of hard use, not of show. His skin was the color of weathered copper, and his hair, black as a raven's wing, fell straight and heavy past his shoulders. Unadorned and unbound, he moved with a silence that was unsettling, his moccasined feet finding purchase on the treacherous scree and gravel as if he were walking on soft earth. He was a part of the land, a shadow that moved within the larger shadows of the cliffs. His face was a map of a life that had known little ease, hard plains, a strong jaw, a mouth that seemed to have forgotten the shape of a smile. But it was his eyes that held the truth of him. They were dark, almost black, and as still and cold as a mountain lake in deep winter. They were watching, always watching. But what they saw was not just the flight of a hawk or the dust of a distant rider. They saw the past. Cale lived alone. He had not spoken a word to another human being in more time than he cared to count. His camp was a shallow, smoke-stained cave high up on a windswept mesa, a place a goat would think twice about climbing. From there, he could see for 50 miles in every direction. His only companion was a lean, wiry Mustang with a mean streak and eyes as wild as his own. He hunted for his food, deer and rabbit, and drank from a hidden spring that seeped from the rock. He was self-contained, a closed circle. The world had taught him the price of connection. He had been a man once, not just a shadow. He had been a husband, a father. He had had a wife with a laugh like running water and a small son with impossibly bright eyes. He had had a people. That was before the blue-coated soldiers came, bringing fire and steel and a hollow-point righteousness that tore his world apart. He had lost them, all of them, burned from his life in a single, terrible afternoon of smoke, screams, and the smell of gunpowder. So he had turned his back, not just on the white man and his choking towns and reservations, but on everything. He had walked away from the scattered, broken remnants of his own people, who tried to build a new life from the ashes. Cale could not build. He could only endure. Love, friendship, closeness, these were words from a dead language. They were luxuries for men who had not seen their world turn to ash. To love something was to give the world a weapon to use against you. To feel was to invite a pain that he knew, with chilling certainty, would unmake him completely. So he had built a wall around his heart, not of stone, but of ice, a cold, clear, absolute stillness. He told himself every morning, when the brutal sun first cut into the darkness of his cave, that he felt nothing. It was the lie that kept him alive. Hundreds of miles to the east, in a world Cale could not have even imagined, was the life that had belonged to Lucy Westbrook. It was a world of high, narrow houses in a city called Boston, a place of damp air, green lawns, and streets paved with cobblestones. It was a world where life was governed by the clock, by the proper fork, by the calling card left on a silver tray. Water came from polished metal taps. Light bloomed from gas fixtures on the wall, and the loudest sound one ever heard was the polite murmur of a string quartet at a neighbor's ball. Lucy was the daughter of a man who owned railroads, a man who could move mountains of earth and steel with a signature on a piece of paper. She had been raised in a cocoon of privilege, her days filled with lessons in French, watercolor painting, and the piano. She was a creature of soft silks and fine wools, her skin pale and untouched by the sun, her hands smooth and unblemished. She was beautiful, in the way a perfect, fragile porcelain doll is beautiful. Her life had been a straight, clear-path education, debut, a suitable marriage to a man of her father's choosing, and then a life spent managing a large house and raising children who would, in turn, do the same. The greatest tragedy she had ever known was her younger brother falling from a pony at the age of 10 and breaking his arm. The greatest hardship she had endured was a week of rain at their summer home by the sea. She was 20 years old, and she had never, not for one single moment, been hungry or cold or truly, deeply afraid. The desert did not care about porcelain dolls. She was here because her father had deemed it fashionable to see the Wild West, a tour of inspection for his latest railroad expansion. He had called it She and Her Brother, now a young man of 22, had been brought along to see the savage beauty of the territories from the plush velvet comfort of a private rail car. The attack had come during a foolishly planned adventure. A short ride out from the dusty, ramshackle town where the railroad temporarily ended. Just her brother, and a guide who had sworn the area was safe. It had been a blur of sudden, terrifying noise. Horses, shouting, the flat, ugly crack of gunfire. She had seen her brother's face, a mask of disbelief, before he toppled from his horse. She had seen the guide turn and flee. Then rough hands had grabbed her, dragged her from her saddle. That was 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks that felt like 2 lifetimes. Now, Lucy Westbrook was a different creature. The fine riding habit she had worn was in tatters. The rich blue fabric ripped and stained with dirt, sweat, and her own blood from the thorny brush she was dragged through. Her pale, sun-gold hair was a tangled, filthy mat, full of twigs and lice. Her skin, once so prized for its fairness, was a raw, blistering testament to the sun's cruelty. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. She was a prisoner. Her captors were a handful of rough, bearded men, the dregs of the earth, who smelled of stale whiskey, unwashed bodies, and a casual, terrifying brutality. They were outlaws, running from some crime in the east, and they had stumbled upon a prize. They knew her name. They knew her father's name. They saw her not as a woman, not even as a human being, but as a sack of gold, ransom. That was the only thing keeping her alive. They were moving her, day after grueling day, deeper into the wilderness, toward some hidden stronghold from which they could send their demands. They gave her barely enough food to survive, scraps of hardtack that tasted like dust and stringy, oversalted jerky that made her gums ache. They gave her water sparingly, from a rank, warm canteen. For the first time in her protected, curated life, Lucy was experiencing the fundamentals. A hunger that was a hollow, twisting pain in her belly. A thirst so profound it felt like her throat was lined with sandpaper. A fatigue that sank into her bones, so deep she would fall asleep in the saddle, only to be jerked awake by the man leading her horse. Her body was a symphony of new, sharp pains, the chafing of the ropes on her wrists at night, the deep bruises from being hauled onto the horse, the sting of 100 cuts and scrapes. She was terrified. The fear was a cold, constant companion, a sickness in her stomach, but beneath the fear, something else was growing. The polite, fragile young woman from Boston was being burned away, day by day, by the relentless sun. In her place, something small, hard, and thorny was beginning to take root. She was starving, she was silent, and she was furious. It was a cold, quiet rage that surprised her. It was a fury at these men, at the guide who had abandoned them, at the land itself, but mostly it was a furious, stubborn refusal to be broken. She would not cry in front of them. She would not beg. She kept her eyes down. She did what she was told, and she watched. She watched them with a fierce, burning intensity, learning their faces, their voices, the way they moved. The hothouse flower was dead. Lucy Westbrook, the survivor, was in the painful, bloody process of being born. The same vast, indifferent sky covered them both. It covered Cale Redbear high on his lonely mesa, cleaning his rifle with practiced, economical movements, his heart encased in ice. He was a master of this land, a ghost who belonged to it. And it covered Lucy Westbrook, 100 miles to the south, tied to a horse, her body screaming in protest, her spirit a tiny, guttering, but defiant flame. She was an intruder, a soft thing being ground to dust by the land. The land, which had taken everything from him, was now the prison for her. It was the stage for both their stories, a harsh, silent arbiter, and the dry wind that blew between them was beginning to pick up, a restless whisper that promised change. The crucible was heating up. Cale Redbear moved his life according to the sun and the seasons, not the ticking of a white man's clock. His world was the high rock and the silent, shadowed canyon. He was tracking a bighorn, a big, old, solitary ram, moving along a ridge that gave him a view of the broken lands stretching south for 100 miles. He was patient. The hunt could take 3 days. It could take a week. The land would provide. He saw the smoke first. It was not the thin blue-white whisper of a careful man's fire. This was a careless, dirty smudge against the vast, clean sky. It was low in the valley, a place he avoided. He stopped, his body blending into the reddish-brown rock. He watched for a full hour, unmoving. The smoke came from a thicket of cottonwoods near a shallow, muddy creek. Amateurs, or arrogant, both were dangerous. His instinct, honed by years of solitude and loss, was to turn, to go back up into the high country and let the fools pass. His life was built on a simple principle: avoidance. He had nothing to gain from any human contact, and everything to lose. But he stayed. Something kept his eyes on that smudge. It was in his territory, the wide, loose boundary he considered his own hunting ground. He did not own the land that was a white man's foolish idea, but he knew it. He knew every spring, every game trail, every shadow. These men were an infection. He left the bighorn. The ram could wait. He moved now, not as a hunter, but as a ghost. He descended the ridge, using arroyos and rock falls as cover, his movements liquid and silent. It took him 2 hours to get within a half-mile of the camp, high above them on a rocky ledge. He counted 6 horses, all shod. The men, 5 of them, were loud. Their voices, rough and grating, carried on the clear air. They were white men, dressed in a mix of old uniforms and trail-worn buckskins. They had the look of men who took what they wanted. He saw the whiskey bottle being passed. He saw the rifles, left leaning carelessly against a wagon wheel. He was about to leave. They were just what they appeared to be: outlaws, drifters. They would be gone by morning, leaving a trail of garbage and fouled water. He had seen it 100 times. Then he saw her. She was separate from them, near a pack mule, her back to him. They had her on a lead rope, as if she were a difficult mare. He watched as one of the men, a big man with a greasy beard, shoved her. She stumbled but did not fall. She turned, and even from this distance, Cale could see the tangle of her sun-bleached hair. A woman, a captive. A cold, familiar nothingness settled over him. It was the white man's world, and this was their business, their cruelty, their suffering. It had nothing to do with him. He had no stake in their lives. He had walled himself off from the world of feeling precisely to avoid this. A woman was a problem. A woman meant pain. He stayed on the ridge until dusk. He could not have said why. He watched the camp settle. He watched the men eat, their forms dark shapes around the growing fire. He watched the woman. She was given a piece of food. She ate it with a slow, deliberate method. as if every bite was a calculation. The sun went down, bleeding purple and orange across the western sky. The air grew cold, as it always does in the desert. Cale pulled his blanket tighter around his shoulders. He would wait until the moon was high, and then he would be gone. But the fire drew him. He had to know. He moved closer, a shadow among shadows, until he was on the canyon floor, a mere 100 yards from them, concealed in a thicket of mesquite. He could see her clearly now. She was sitting on the ground, her hands tied in front of her, the rope looped around a dead tree stump. She was beyond weary. The exhaustion was a visible thing, a weight that pressed her down. Her clothes, once fine, were ruined, torn and stained. Her face was a mess of sunburn, dirt and dried blood from a cut on her cheek. She was gaunt. The starvation was plain. It hollowed out her cheeks and made her eyes seem too large. But it was her eyes he watched. One of the men, the leader, kicked at her feet. "Nothing to say, princess. You've been quiet for 2 days. Tongue fall out." Lucy Westbrook did not move. She just lifted her head. She looked at the man. Cale saw the look. It was not fear. It was not pleading. It was a pure, cold, undiluted hatred. It was a look that promised murder, if only her small, battered body had the strength to deliver it. In that moment, she was not a fragile, terrified girl. She was a cornered rattlesnake, broken and bleeding, but still ready to strike. Cale felt an unwelcome, unfamiliar flicker inside his chest. A part of him he had thought long dead. It was respect. This was not a creature of the soft eastern lands. Not anymore. The desert had burned all that away. What was left was something hard, something that would not break. He watched her later, when the men had fallen into their drunken stupors. The fire was low. The single sentry they had posted was already nodding, his rifle balanced on his knee. Cale saw Lucy move. She was not sleeping. Her hands, hidden in the shadows, were working. She was twisting, pulling, rubbing the ropes against a sharp edge of the stump he could not see. She was not a warrior. She had no weapons, no strength to match them, but she was trying to get free. She was willing to do anything, to sacrifice whatever she had left, to find an escape. She was testing her cage, just as a wild, trapped animal would. A strange, cold feeling passed over Cale. He was looking at a reflection. He saw in her the same stubborn refusal to die that had kept him alive on his mesa. He turned to leave. He walked 10 paces into the darkness. This was not his fight. She would not escape. The men would wake. They would hurt her for trying, and they would move on. She was a ghost. She was already dead. He had his own ghosts. He did not need another. He stopped. He could not. It was a physical weight. He could not make his legs move. He stood in the dark, hating himself, hating the woman, hating the men who had brought this to his land. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him, what would happen to her. He knew the casual, brutal nature of men like these. He knew she was a burden. She was a white woman. She would be loud. She would be slow. She would be weak. She would bring nothing but trouble and, most likely, death. Taking her meant taking on her enemies. It meant breaking his solitude. It meant rejoining a world he had sworn to forget. He looked back. He saw her head slump forward. A small, defeated movement. A single, shuddering breath escaped her. She thought she was alone. She had been strong for them. But now, in the dark, her body was betraying her. He could not leave her. The ice around his heart, built and fortified over years of bitter loss, cracked. It was a hairline fracture. But it was enough. The man he had been, the man who had protected a family, stirred. He turned back toward the camp. His choice was made. It was not a choice for her. It was a choice for himself. He could not live with the man he would be if he walked away. His body, which had been still, became a conduit for purpose. He was no longer an observer. He was a warrior. He moved to the left, circling the camp, using the sound of the wind and the nervous stamping of the horses to cover his approach. He moved behind the sentry. The man was asleep now, his head on his chest. Cale's hand covered the man's mouth. His knife, drawn from its sheath on his hip, was a cold, sharp kiss across the throat. There was a brief, wet struggle. Cale held him until he was still, then lowered him to the ground without a sound. One. He crossed the open space to the men's bedrolls. They were close, huddled for warmth. He moved to the nearest, a quick, deep thrust to the heart. The man arched, a silent scream dying in his throat. Two. The third man was the leader, the one with the beard. He was sleeping on his back, his mouth open. Cale did not hesitate. The knife went in under the chin, driving up into the brain, a clean, instant death. Three. The fourth man woke. He sat up, his eyes wide, trying to understand the shadow that was on him. He opened his mouth to yell. Cale's hand, hard as stone, smashed into his face, breaking his nose and driving the air from his lungs. The knife finished him. Four. The last man, the fifth, was scrambling from his blanket, reaching for his pistol. He was too slow. Cale was on him, a blur of motion. He did not use the knife. He used his hands. He broke the man's neck with a single brutal twist. Five. It had taken less time than it takes to tell. The silence that returned was deeper, heavier. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the sudden, terrified snorting of the horses. Cale stood in the center of the camp, breathing easily. His knife was in his hand. He was covered in the warm, dark blood of his work. He turned and looked at Lucy. She had watched it all. Her eyes were impossibly wide, her face a pale, shocked mask in the firelight. She was staring at him, at this silent, copper-skinned demon who had appeared from the darkness and dismantled her captors like a man butchering cattle. He walked toward her. She flinched, flattening herself against the tree stump. She made a small, whimpering sound. She thought he was coming to kill her, too. He stopped 5 feet from her. He looked at her, his face impassive, unreadable. The firelight caught the blood on his skin and the flat, cold blackness of his eyes. He raised the knife. Lucy squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid, bracing for the final cut. She heard a slice. She opened her eyes. He had cut the rope. The lengths of it fell away from her wrists. He stood there, watching her. He did not offer a hand. He did not offer a word of comfort. He just watched, as if she were a strange, new creature he had discovered. Cale turned his back on her. He walked to the dead men's supplies. He found a canteen, checked it, and found a strip of dried jerky. He walked back to her. She was still on the ground, rubbing her raw, bleeding wrists, staring at him as if he were a hallucination. He tossed the canteen and the jerky. They landed in the dirt at her feet. He gestured with his chin to the darkness outside the camp. "We go," he said. The voice was a low, guttural rasp, a sound unused to speech. It was the first time he had spoken to another human being in 3 years. He turned and walked toward the horses, not looking back to see if she would follow. He had done what he had to do. The rest was up to her. Lucy Westbrook scrambled in the dirt. Her body was a screaming chorus of pain, but the animal part of her brain, the part that had watched the silent, bloody slaughter, knew only one thing: survival. The jerky and the canteen, he had thrown them to her. She grabbed them, her fingers clumsy and stiff. Her wrists were on fire, the rope burns weeping in the cold night air. Cale Redbear did not wait for her. He moved to the horses. There were 6. He looked at them with a fast, appraising eye. He was not a man who wasted motion. He cut the picket line, his knife a silver flash. He grabbed the reins of 2 the outlaw's best, a strong bay gelding, and a smaller, wiry dun, the others. He slapped hard on their rumps, sending them scattering into the night. He was erasing the trail, confusing it. He went to the wagon. moving with that same terrifying economy. He took a sack of ammunition. He took a heavy canvas water bag, hefting it to feel its weight. He found a bag of hardtack and a small sack of coffee beans. He took nothing else. He took no money, no trinkets. He took only what was needed to live. He tied the supplies to the dun, his knots fast and sure. Then he swung up onto the bay. He did it in one fluid motion, a movement as natural as breathing. He sat on the horse, tall and dark, the rifle in his hand. He held the lead rope for the dun. He looked down at her. Lucy was on her feet, swaying. She held the canteen in a death grip. She looked from him to the 5 dark, crumpled shapes on the ground, and back to him. The night was a slaughterhouse, and he was the butcher. He had saved her from them, only to claim her himself. He did not speak. He did not offer a hand. He did not kick a foot from the stirrup for her to use. He simply waited. His eyes, in the flickering firelight, were flat and cold. He had killed for her, and now he was done. The next move was hers. That cold, hard fury that had kept her alive for 2 weeks surged. He would not help her. He would not. He was as hard and unforgiving as the land itself. She dropped the jerky and stuffed it into the pocket of her torn skirt. She fumbled with the canteen, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She would not drink. Not yet. She would not show him any more weakness. She went to the dun. There was no saddle. Her arms ached. Her legs felt like water. Her body, broken and starved, refused. She tried to lift her leg, but there was no strength. Cale watched. He did not move. Tears, hot and angry, pricked her eyes. She would not cry. She would not. She set her teeth, and in a primal, desperate lunge, she grabbed the horse's mane. She jammed her foot against a knot in the lead rope and hauled herself up. It was clumsy, agonizing. Her skin scraped against the horse's rough hide. She landed on its back, not like a rider, but like a sack of grain, her leg thrown over, her hands tangled in the mane. She was on... Without a word, Cale turned the bay. He kicked it into a canter, and the dun, tied by the lead, was forced to follow. Lucy was thrown forward, clinging for her life. The camp, the fire, the dead men, they vanished into the darkness behind them as if they had never been. They rode for hours. They rode until the moon was a white scar on the black sky. Cale did not slow. He did not look back. He pushed north up from the shallow creek valley and into the high, broken country. He led them over solid rock to leave no trail, through thick stands of juniper that clawed at her skin. Lucy's world dissolved into a rhythm of pain, the horse's bare, bony spine against her. The jarring, endless motion, the cold wind that cut through her ruined clothes, the fire in her wrists, the deeper, hollow ache of her stomach. She was a thing of misery, clinging to a horse, led by a ghost. The shock wore off. The terror receded. All that was left was the vast, profound exhaustion, the adrenaline that had fueled her, first in her captivity, and then in her escape, was gone. There was nothing left beneath it. Just before dawn, when the sky was a bruised, starless purple, he stopped. He had found a small, sheltered pocket in the rocks, a place where the wind did not scream, but only whispered. He dismounted. He stood by his horse, rubbing its neck. He looked at her, waiting. Lucy did not move. She could not. Her hands were locked in the dun's mane, her body frozen. She was no longer a person. She was a shell, and she was empty. He saw her immobility. He let out a low, frustrated sound. He came toward her, when his hand, dark and hard, closed on her arm. She shattered. She screamed. It was not a ladylike sound. It was a raw, broken, animal noise. She began to fight him, flailing with a weak, hysterical energy. "No," she gasped, her voice a dry rasp. "Do not touch me! Do not touch me!" She had been passed from one set of brutal hands to another. this man, this killer, was no different. He was just more quiet, more efficient. She had been strong, she had been furious, but she had no more strength. She had no more fury. She had only this terrible, bottomless despair. Cale was completely baffled. He understood violence. He understood fear of death. He did not understand this. He had saved her. He had offered her water. Now she was fighting him, the one who had freed her. It made no sense. He was a man of the earth, and this was an unearthly thing. "You must," he said. His voice was rough. "We must go." "No, I will not. Leave me." She slid from the horse, collapsing in a heap on the cold stones. She curled into herself, her shoulders shaking. "Just leave me. Let me die." Cale stood over her. This was the weakness he had feared. This was the burden. His first sharp instinct was to obey her, to take his horse and his supplies and ride back to his mesa. She was not his people. Her life was not his. He had brought her out of the fire, but he could not force her to live. He looked down at her. He saw the tangled, filthy hair. He saw the thin, bony line of her back, shaking under the rags. He saw the raw, open rope burns on her wrists. He remembered her face at the outlaw camp, the cold, murderous hatred in her eyes. That woman was not this woman. That woman was a fighter. This one was broken. He could not. The thread that had pulled him from his ridge, the crack in the ice, it held him. He could not leave her. He turned from her. He tied the horses. He walked back to her. He did not speak. He did not offer comfort. He bent, and in one swift motion, he lifted her. She was impossibly light, a bundle of dry sticks and rags. She began to fight again, pounding on his back with her small, weak fists. "Put me down! I said put me down!" He put her down. He threw her, unceremoniously, over his shoulder. Her world turned upside down. She was a sack of potatoes. "No," she wept, her humiliation complete. He ignored her. He began to walk. Leaving the horses tied, he moved away from the pocket in the rocks, toward a solid wall of granite. He pushed aside a curtain of old, dry vines, revealing a path, a trail so narrow it was barely visible. He began to climb. He climbed for what felt like an hour, up, always up, into the heart of the mesa. The path was steep and treacherous. He moved with a steady, mountain goat's grace, his moccasins silent on the rock. He did not stumble. He did not breathe hard. He just climbed, carrying his burden. Lucy's struggles weakened. Her cries turned to whimpers, and her whimpers turned to silence. She went limp, unconscious or simply resigned. He stopped. He pushed through a thicket of scrub oak, and they were in... It was a hidden place, a secret, a circular canyon, open to the sky, but walled on all sides by sheer red rock. In the center, a miracle, a single, ancient cottonwood tree, its leaves a vibrant, impossible green, spread its branches over a pool of water. It was not a pond, it was a spring, bubbling up from the earth, clear as glass. Ferns and watercress grew thick around its edges. This was Cale's place, the heart of his world, a place no white man had ever seen. He had never brought another living soul here. He walked to the edge of the spring, to a small patch of clean, white sand. He knelt and gently, almost awkwardly, he laid her down. She was a ruin. Her face, streaked with dirt and tears, was pale as death. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. She was shivering, a violent, bone-deep tremor. He watched her for a long moment. This was the place his wife and son had bathed. The water was sacred, and this white woman was polluting it with her pain. Or, he thought, the place was demanding he cleanse her. He took his skinning knife from his belt. He cut a strip of cloth from the bottom of his own shirt. He dipped it into the cold, clear water. He knelt beside her. She was barely conscious. Her eyes were open, but they were dull, unfocused. He reached out his hand. His left hand, his right hand was for killing. His left hand was, it was just a hand. He saw her tense, a small flicker of the old fear. He cupped her chin. His hand was rough, calloused, scarred. It was the hand of a man who worked with rock and hide and steel. It was stained with the blood of her captors. And yet, the touch was so light, it was barely a touch at all. He lifted her face. He looked at her, really looked. She was a virgin. He knew it. Not in body, perhaps, though he suspected that too. But in spirit, she was untouched by this world, by his world. She was a thing from a place he could not imagine, a place of softness and clean water. And she was starving, not just for food, but for safety, for a moment of peace. She was silent, because there were no words for this. And she was furious, because it was the only thing that had kept her alive. He looked at the delicate line of her jaw, the impossible fineness of her pale skin beneath the grime and the sun scald. She was a piece of fine porcelain, dropped in a quarry. She was gold, lost in the river mud. He lifted her face, and he touched her like she was gold. With the wet cloth, he began to clean her. His movements were not sensual. They were not even tender, not in the way a soft man would be tender. They were slow, precise, careful. He was a warrior, and this was a new, strange task. He was touching her as if she were a priceless, fragile object he did not understand, but which he must not, under any circumstances, break. He wiped the dirt from her forehead. He cleaned the dried blood from her cheek. He gently washed the crusted tears from her eyelashes. Lucy watched him. Her vision swam. But she saw him. She saw the killer. She saw the savage. And she felt his hand, his touch. It was not the greedy, rough touch of her captors. It was not the angry, impatient touch of her rescue. It was something else. It was the touch of a man handling a newborn bird. It was too much. The contradiction, the impossibility of it. A single, hot tear. A tear not of fear or anger, but of some profound, breaking relief, slipped from the corner of her eye and ran down her clean cheek. Cale saw the tear. His hand stopped. His dark, unreadable eyes stared at the drop of water. He seemed, for a moment, as lost as she was. He dipped the cloth again. He cleaned the tear track. He put the cloth down. He picked up the canteen he had taken from her hand when he lifted her. He uncapped it. He slipped his hard arm under her neck, lifting her head just slightly. "Drink," he said. The word was a rough command. She looked at him, at his face, so close to hers. The hard lines. The black, black eyes. She parted her lips. He tipped the canteen, and the cold, sweet spring water touched her mouth. She drank. She drank greedily, choking, sputtering, but she drank. It was the water of life. It was a baptism. When she was done, she fell back, her eyes closing. The last of her energy was gone. He watched her for a moment. Then he went to the horses, untied them, and brought them into the hidden canyon. He returned. He laid out his own bedroll, the one he kept here in a small cave behind the ferns. The furs were old, but soft and clean. He lifted her one last time. He was becoming accustomed to her lightness. He laid her on the furs and covered her with his blanket. She was already asleep, a deep, bottomless sleep, the first safe sleep she had had in weeks. Cale Red Bear sat 10 feet away from her, his back against the cold. Red stone. He laid his rifle across his lap. He had done it. He had brought this woman into the center of his life. He had brought her to his sacred place. He had cleaned her. He had given her water. He had tied himself to her, and her to him. He felt the walls of his ice fortress, the solitude he had spent years building, groaning under a new, strange pressure. He was a guardian again. And it was a feeling he had sworn he would never, ever feel again. He was terrified. Lucy awoke to the sound of a bird. It was a clear, three-note call, a sound of such impossible, ordinary peace that she was certain she was dead. She was not dead, she was warm. Her eyes opened, and the first thing she saw was a sheer, blinding wall of red rock, and above it, a circle of brilliant blue sky. She was lying on her back, cocooned in a thick, fur-lined blanket. The air was cool and clean, and it smelled of damp earth and cottonwood leaves. She turned her head. The movement was a slow, creaking effort. Her body was a universe of aches. He was there. He sat 20 feet away, near the pool of water, his back against the tree. He was not looking at her. He was working, his hands busy with a piece of wood and his knife. He was carving something, his motions economical and sure. He was as silent and still as the rock he leaned against. Memory came back, not as a thought, but as a physical jolt. The fire, the blood, the bodies. His hand on her face, the water. She was in the lion's den. She had been saved by the tiger. She lay perfectly still, watching him. He was not the blood-soaked demon of the night before. He had washed. His skin, in the morning light, was a clean, deep copper. His black hair shone. He wore a simple pair of buckskin trousers and moccasins. He was bare-chested, and the muscles of his back and shoulders moved under his skin with a power that was both beautiful and terrifying. He was a part of this place. He had not brought her to his camp. He had brought her to his lair. She was alive. She was safe, for the moment, and she was ravenously hungry. The hunger, now that the terror had receded, was a hollow, demanding pain in her stomach, as if he had heard her thoughts. His hands stilled. He turned his head and looked at her. His eyes, they were as black and unreadable as they had been in the firelight. They held no warmth, no welcome. They just were. They were the eyes of the hawk he had seen, registering her, assessing her. He stood up. He was tall, taller than she had realized. He walked to the supplies he had taken, which were now piled neatly on a flat rock. He picked up the bag of hardtack and the strip of jerky he had tossed her the night before. He walked over to her and dropped them, not at her feet, but on the blanket beside her. He did not speak. Lucy pushed herself up. The blanket was heavy. Her body screamed. She was dizzy, her head swimming. She looked at the food. Hardtack, jerky. It was the food of her captors, but it was food. She pulled the blanket around her thin shoulders. Her torn, filthy dress was a humiliation. She felt exposed, a tattered doll in this man's clean, wild place. She picked up the jerky. Her hands, though still raw at the wrists, were steadier. She tore at the dried meat with her teeth. It was tough, salty, and tasted like smoke. It was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. She ate it all, her movements small and furtive, as if she were a stray dog. Then she ate the hardtack, softening it with water from the canteen. He watched her. He did not turn away. He watched her eat, his face a mask of stone. It was an intimacy that made her burn. He had seen her at her lowest, broken and weeping. He had touched her, and now he watched her eat like an animal. The polite, fragile girl from Boston was well and truly gone. When she was finished, he jested with his chin toward the spring. "Wash," he said, the same rough two-word vocabulary. She bristled. The fury, which had slept, now stirred. The command. But she looked at her hands, her face. She was filthy. She needed it. She stood, wrapping the heavy blanket around her like a robe. It was his. It smelled of him, a scent of leather, sage, and something else, something uniquely his. She walked to the spring. She knelt on the sand and looked at her reflection. A stranger looked back, a gaunt, wild-eyed creature with matted hair and sun-scorched skin. She plunged her hands into the water. It was so cold it made her gasp. She scrubbed at her face, her neck, her arms. She washed the grime away, the memory of her captor's touch. She wished she could wash away the last 2 weeks, her brother, her life. When she was done, she felt fractionally more human. She turned. He had saddled the 2 horses. He had packed the supplies. "We go," he said. Go where?" The words were a shock, even to her, her own voice. It sounded thin. He looked at her as if she had asked a profoundly stupid question. He pointed, not south, where the town was, not east, where her life had been. He pointed north, up, into the vast, broken teeth of the mountains. "Home," he said. It seemed to be the only word he knew. "I cannot," she said, panic rising. "I must go south, to the town, to the railroad, my family." He just shook his head, a single, slow, decisive motion. He walked to the bay horse and mounted. He held the lead to the dun. He was not asking. He was not negotiating. He had saved her. She was his, whether she was his property or his responsibility or his captive. She did not know. It did not matter. The choice was the same. She could stay here, in this beautiful, secret place, and starve. Or she could go with him. She hated him. She hated his silence, his arrogance, his assumption of control. But he was life. The world outside this canyon was death. She walked to the dun. This time, she was not going to fall on it like a sack. She was weak, but her anger gave her strength. She jammed her foot into the stirrup Cale had rigged from a loop of rope, grabbed the mane, and pulled herself up. She settled on the dun's back. She held the blanket around her. She was cold, but she was a rider. He nodded, a fractional movement of his chin. Respect or just acknowledgement. He turned the horse, and they left the canyon, pushing back through the narrow, hidden trail. The world outside was a furnace. The sun was a white-hot hammer. The land was a shimmering, red-brown wasteland. They were moving. Cale setting a relentless, steady pace. He did not stop. He did not seem to feel the heat. He rode, his back straight, his eyes constantly moving, scanning the horizon, the rocks, the sky. Lucy's world became a bubble of misery. The heat, the sun on her head, the jarring trot of the horse, her thirst, her hunger. She was wrapped in his blanket, and she was still cold 1 minute, sweating the next. They rode all day. He did not speak, not one word. The silence was a presence, a third traveler. It was a heavy, suffocating thing. In her world, silence was a pause between words, a rest. In his, it was the default. It was the language of the rocks, the sky. Words were an intrusion. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ask him, "Who are you? Why did you save me? What do you want from me? Where are we going?" But she did this. His silence was a wall. She would not throw herself against it. They were 2 people from different planets. He was a creature of this hard, brutal, silent land. She was a creature of noise, of conversation, of soft carpets and polite rules. Here, her rules did not apply. Her money, her father's name, her beauty, they meant nothing. They were ash. Here, the only things that mattered were water, shadow, and this silent, dangerous man. Late in the afternoon, her body began to fail. It was not her spirit. It was her feet. The thin leather slippers she had worn for the adventure ride 2 weeks ago were gone, destroyed. She had been riding, but he had made her walk several times, leading the horses over patches of sharp rock where they might slip. Her feet were on fire. She tried to hide it. She bit her lip, focusing on the pain, turning it to anger. She would not be weak. She would not. But when he finally stopped for the night, in a high crevice that looked down on a vast, empty valley, she could not hide the limp. As she slid from the dun, her ankle turned, and a cry of pain was forced from her lips. He was there, turning from his horse. He saw it. His black eyes dropped from her face to her feet. She sat heavily on the rock, her face burning with shame. He said nothing. He unsaddled the horses, rubbed them down with handfuls of dry grass, and tethered them. He built a fire. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than his hand, built in a crack in the rock. He used dry, dead wood that gave off almost no smoke. He was a shadow, all his movements quiet, precise, purposeful. She huddled on the rock, her feet tucked under her. The pain was a hot, liquid throb. He made coffee, boiling the beans in a small tin cup. He handed it to her. It was black, bitter, and scalaming hot. It was wonderful. He disappeared. He did not take his rifle. He just vanished. One moment he was there. The next he was gone, swallowed by the dusk. Lucy's heart leaped into her throat. He had left her. He had taken her this far and abandoned her. She sat in the twilight, the terror a cold hand gripping her heart. She was alone, in this vast, terrifying emptiness. He was gone for an hour. The sky turned from purple to a deep, star-filled black. The wind grew colder. Then, he was back. He appeared as silently as he had left. He carried a rabbit in one hand, his knife in the other. He also carried a small, leafy branch. He skinned the rabbit with a fast, practiced efficiency that made her stomach turn. But she did not look away. She would not. He spitted the meat and set it to roast over the tiny fire. He turned to her. He gestured to her feet. "No," she said, pulling back. "They are fine." He just looked at her. He did not sigh. He did not argue. He just waited. The patience of the stone. She knew, with a sinking feeling, that he would wait all night. He would not move. He would not speak. He would just wait, and she would be the one to break. Her anger was useless. Her pride was useless. Slowly, hating him, hating herself, she unwrapped the blanket from her legs. She had tried to hide them, but the thin scraps of her stockings were gone. Her feet were a ruin. The soles were a mass of broken, weeping blisters, the skin rubbed raw, caked with dirt and dried blood. He looked at them. His face did not change. There was no pity, no disgust, just observation. He went to the leafy branch. He put a wad of the leaves in his mouth and began to chew. He chewed them into a dark, green pulp. He spat the poultice into his hand. He came toward her. She recoiled. "What is that? Do not put that on me." He grabbed her ankle. It was not a request. His grip was not cruel, but it was absolute. It was the grip of a man who would not be denied. He held her foot steady. She froze. She could not fight him. His hands, the hands that had killed 5 men, the hands that had carved the wood, were surprisingly gentle. He spread the cooling, stinging pulp over the raw blisters. It burned. She hissed, but she did not pull away. His grip was too strong. He held her foot until the stinging subsided. Then he released her and did the other. He went back to his supplies. He took his skinning knife. She had not seen it before. A piece of tanned deer hide, soft and pliable. He laid her tattered, useless boot on it. He looked at her foot, then at the boot. He threw the boot away. He gestured to her foot. "On this." She hesitated. Then she placed her foot, poultice and all, on the hide. He took his knife and, with quick, sure strokes, cut a shape around her foot, leaving a wide margin. He did the same for the other. He punched small holes in the hide with the tip of his knife. He took thin strips of leather from his pouch and threaded them through. He had made her a pair of rough, formless moccasins. He handed them to her. She looked at the rude shoes. She looked at him. He had turned back to the fire, testing the rabbit with his knife. He had shown no emotion. He had not offered a word of comfort, but he had seen her pain, and he had, in his own way, fixed it. He had tended her wounds. He had made her shoes. He was not a brute, or, if he was, He was a brute with a strange, compelling, and utterly alien code. He was a man who had killed 5 men without blinking, and then taken the time to chew leaves for her feet. She looked at the dark, silent figure. The distance between them was still a vast, unmapped territory, but he had just, without a word, shown her the first flicker of a path. She pulled on the soft moccasins. They were a blessing. The moccasins were a new language. They were a gift, but they were also a lesson. They told her that her old life, her thin-soled slippers, was useless here. They told her that this man, Cale, saw her not as a woman, not as a lady, but as a creature that needed to be shod, a creature he was now responsible for. They traveled for 3 more days. Climbing, the world fell away beneath them. They were in the high, lonely country now, a place of wind-scoured rock, stunted pines, and a sky that was a deep, aching blue. The silence was their only companion. It stretched between them, vast and empty. Lucy grew stronger. The starvation had been replaced by a constant, dull hunger. But Cale was a good hunter. He would disappear at dusk and return with a brace of rabbits or a fool hen. He taught her, with his usual economy of motion, how to find water. He would point to a certain type of green-leafed bush or gesture to a crack in a rock. He taught her to gather the small, bitter pine nuts. She was becoming a creature of this land. Her hands, no longer soft, were now scratched and stained, but they were useful. Her body, once a prison of weakness, now did what she asked of it. She could walk for 5 miles over broken rock without complaint. She could climb. She was learning. The anger was still there, but it had a new target. It was no longer for him. It was for the world that had done this to her. And Cale, he was a puzzle of stone. He never spoke of himself. He never asked about her. He provided. He protected. He watched. His vigilance was a constant, unnerving presence. He slept in 4-hour stretches, sitting up, his rifle in his lap. He would wake, listen, and then nod for her to rest, while he took the horses to water. He was a machine built for survival. But she had seen him. In the mornings, when he thought she was asleep, he would face the rising sun. He did not pray, not in any way she recognized. He would just stand, his hands at his sides, and be still. He would breathe in the new day, a long, slow breath, and in that moment, his face, usually so hard, would soften. He looked sad. He looked like a man remembering a terrible loss. The change came on the 4th day. They were moving through a narrow, brush-choked canyon. It was a bad place. Cale was tense. His eyes were never still. He had made her dismount and walk behind him, leading the horses. They came around a sharp bend, and there they were. 3 men, not the same men. These were different, miners, maybe, or prospectors, cut from the same rough, brutal cloth as her first captors. They had a small, sputtering fire. They were cooking something. They looked up, their faces a mixture of surprise and a low, quick-burning greed. They saw Cale, and they tensed. They saw Lucy, and they smiled. It was the smiles that turned her blood to ice. "Well now," the one with the yellow beard said. He stood up slowly, his hand near the pistol on his hip. "Look what the wind blew in. You lost friend." Cale did not answer. His rifle was in his hand, held low, at his side. He did not raise it. He just stood, a statue of deadly potential. "That is a fine-looking piece of property you got there," the man said, his eyes on Lucy. "We'd be willing to trade." "Go," Cale said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the canyon. "Go," the man laughed. "I do not think so. I think, Cale moved. It was not a human movement. It was a blur. The rifle was at his shoulder. It spoke once. The flat, sharp crack echoed off the canyon walls. The man with the yellow beard did not laugh anymore. He just fell, a hole where his smile had been. The other two men dove for cover, scrambling behind the rocks. A pistol shot rang out, the bullet whining, ricocheting off the stone far above Cale's head. "Stay," Cale said to Lucy. He shoved her back, behind the horses. The horses screamed, their eyes white. Cale melted into the rocks on the other side of the trail. He was gone. He was a man one moment, and a shadow the next. Lucy's heart was a hammer in her chest. She was alone with the terrified horses and the two unseen men. She heard a shout. "He is over there! Get him!" Another shot, then two more. The sound was deafening in the narrow space. She heard a man scream. It was a terrible cut-off sound. One left. She peered around the side of the bay horse. She saw nothing, just rocks, brush, and the wisp of smoke from the now abandoned fire. Where was Cale? Then she saw him. A flicker of movement. The last man. He was not near the fire. He was high, on the canyon wall, climbing, trying to get above Cale. He had a rifle. He was moving to a ledge. He did not see her. He was focused on the rocks where Cale had disappeared. Cale did not see him. Lucy's throat closed. She was a witness, a victim. That was her role. No. The fury, the cold, hard rage that had been forged in her. It rose. She looked around. A rock. It was the size of her fist. She was not a warrior. She was not a killer. But she was a survivor. She stepped out from behind the horse. She was in the open. "Here!" she screamed. The word tore from her raw throat. The man on the ledge. He stopped. He turned. His face was a mask of surprise. He saw her. He raised his rifle. A shot? Not from the man. From below. The man on the ledge arched. His rifle clattered on the rocks. He just toppled. He fell. A loose, spiraling fall, and hit the canyon floor with a dry, empty sound. Silence. The horses stamped. The echo died. Cale emerged from the rocks. He was not hurt. He stood over the man he had shot first. He did not look at the man on the canyon floor. He looked at Lucy. She was standing in the open, the rock still in her hand. She was shaking so violently she could barely stand. Her face was as white as paper. He walked to her. He did not stop. He came right to her. She thought he would be angry. She had disobeyed. She had moved. He stopped in front of her. His black eyes searched her face. He saw her terror. He saw her defiance. He reached out and took the rock from her hand. Her fingers were frozen, and he had to uncurl them. He looked at the rock, then tossed it to the ground. "You move," he said. He was above you," she whispered. "You move. You make noise." He did not sound angry. He sounded confused. He was stating a fact he could not process. He would have killed you. He looked at her for a long, unblinking moment. Then he nodded. A single, short acknowledgement. He had been seen. He had been helped. He turned from her. "We cannot stay. The shots." He went to the men's supplies. He took ammunition. He took their water. He took a small sack of dried beans. He ignored the small pile of gold dust in a leather poke. He moved with a cold, hard efficiency. He was cleaning up. He did not want to be here when the sun went down. He gestured for her. "We must ride." They rode. They rode hard. He did not take the easy trail. He pushed the horses up a sheer, crumbling slope, a place no one would think to follow. They rode until the sun was a dying, bloody smear in the west. The storm came in from the north, a black wall of clouds that swallowed the sky. The wind came first, a cold, howling ghost. Then the rain. It was not a gentle rain. It was a cold, driving horizontal sheet of water that turned the world to a gray blur. They were exposed, the horses, heads down, refused to move. They were freezing. "Here!" Cale shouted over the wind. He had found it, a dark slash in the rock, a cave. It was not his sacred spring. It was a hole, a shallow, wind-hollowed opening, barely 10 feet deep and 20 feet wide. He pulled her from the dun. He shoved her inside. "Stay!" He fought the horses, pulling them under the scant shelter of the overhang. He tied them. He threw their saddles down to block the worst of the wind. He came into the cave. He was soaked, his black hair plastered to his skull. He was a force of nature, as wild as the storm itself. He moved to the back of the small space. He had his fire-starting kit. He worked, his hands shielded by his body. In 5 minutes, he had a small, sputtering flame. He fed it dry. Dead twigs he had pulled from a pack rat's nest. The fire grew. It was a tiny, brave thing, but it was warmth. It was light. They huddled in the back of the cave. The storm screamed outside. The rain was a solid curtain, sealing them in. The space was impossibly small. His knee was 3 inches from hers. She could feel the heat coming off his body. She could smell the rain on his skin. He took the last of the cooked rabbit from his pack and handed it to her. She ate. He drank from his canteen. The adrenaline from the fight was gone. The cold, the exhaustion. They were sinking into her bones. She began to shake. Not from fear this time. From cold, a deep, bone-rattling shiver. He saw it. He took his blanket, the heavy fur one, from his pack. He unrolled it and, without a word, he draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it tight. "Thank you." He just nodded. They sat, the fire crackled, the storm raged. The intimacy of the small space, the shared danger, the heat of the fire. It pressed in on them. The silence, which had been their custom, now felt unnatural. It was too loud. She had to break it. "Boston," she said, her voice a small sound, nearly lost in the wind. He turned his head. "That is where I am from, Boston. It is not like this. It is green. There are trees and water. So much water. You never think of it." He watched her, his face in the firelight a map of hard shadows. He was listening. "I had a house. My father, I think he is an important man. He owns things, railroads." She felt a need to explain herself, who she was. "I had a room. It was painted yellow. I had a piano. I would play. Music. Just sounds from paper." She looked at her hands, the grime under her nails, the cuts on her knuckles. "My hands, my teacher. He would be angry. He said my hands were for music, not for this." She laughed. It was a dry, broken sound. "My brother, his name was Edward. He was not like this place. He was soft. He liked books. He came to see the savage beauty. He fell off his horse. The men, they shot him. I did not say goodbye." The words were coming now. They were pouring out of her. The things she had held in for weeks. The fear, the grief. "I was supposed to get married," she whispered. "In the fall, to a man named Arthur. He has damp hands. He smells of paper and money. I did not want to, but it was my life. It was what was done." She looked at Cale. He had not moved. He was a stone, receiving her words. "They took me. The first men. They were—" She could not say it. "They looked at me. She was crying. The tears were hot, sliding down her dirty face. "I was so angry. I was angry every day. At them, at my father, for bringing me here. At Edward, for dying. At God, and at myself, for being so weak, for being so useless, a porcelain doll. That is what my mother called me." She looked at him, Her eyes blurred.
I am not that anymore.
She finished. The story was told. She was empty. She sat, shivering, waiting for him to speak. Cale Redbear had listened. He had heard the words Boston, piano, father, brother. They were just words, but he had heard the sounds underneath. He had heard the sound of a cage breaking. He had thought she was weak, a white woman, a burden. He had been wrong. He had lost his world, and it had filled him with ice. She had lost her world, and it had filled her with fire. He saw the strength in her. It was not his strength. It was not the strength to kill. It was the strength to endure, to bend, and to scream. Here, in the face of death. He looked at her, this small, broken, and impossibly strong creature. She was not a doll. She was a knife. The ice in his chest shifted. It was a painful, groaning movement. He felt something, a warmth. It was respect. It was something more. It was a connection. He was a lonely, broken man, and he was looking at a lonely, broken woman. He had no words for her. His language was dead. His comfort was action. He reached over. He took his heavy fur bedroll and pushed it toward her. Sleep, he said. She looked at the furs, then at him. He would be left with nothing but the bare, cold rock. But you, Sleep, he said again. It was not a command. It was a provision. She lay down. She curled into the furs, her back to the fire. The warmth was a blessing. She was so tired, her body ached, her heart ached. But she was not alone. Cale sat up. He moved to the mouth of the cave, his back to her, his rifle across his knees. He sat between her and the storm. He watched the rain. He was a warrior. He had guarded his people. He had guarded his family. He had failed. Now he was guarding this white woman, this stranger. He did not like it. It was a weakness. It was a vulnerability. To care for something was to invite pain. But as he sat, listening to the wind howl and the sound of her breathing, slow and steady in sleep, he knew it was too late. He was already a guardian again. The wall of ice was broken. The storm passed in the way of the high country. All at once, the rain stopped as if a door had been slammed shut, leaving behind a world scoured clean and dripping. The sun rose with a cold, watery light, striking diamonds from the wet rock and promising a brutal steam heat by midday. In the cave, the fire was a pile of gray ash. Lucy had slept, but she had not rested. She had been aware, all night, of the man sitting at the mouth of the cave. She had heard his stillness, a living, breathing silence that was more present than any noise. He was her guardian, her wall against the storm. When the light touched her, she sat up. The fur bedroll was impossibly warm. He was standing, looking out. He had not moved. It seemed all night. He turned when he heard her. His eyes were different. The blank, unreadable flatness was gone. When he looked at her, he saw her. He saw the woman who had spoken of Boston and pianos and a dead brother. He saw the person, not the package. She saw the night's cost. He was sitting on the cold stone, his blanket given to her. He was stiff. He was tired. She could see it in the tight line of his shoulders. He gave her no time for thanks or awkwardness. He gestured to the supplies. "We eat, we go," he said. They ate the last of the rabbit and a square of hardtack, washing it down with cold water. The intimacy of the storm was gone, replaced by the urgent, practical reality of the day. They saddled the horses in silence. Lucy moved with a new sureness. She did not wait for him. She readied the dun, checking the crude stirrup, tightening the cinch. He watched her. He gave a single sharp nod. They rode. He was pushing north again, harder this time. He was no longer just traveling. He was going home, to his high, safe place. He was bringing her with him. Lucy no longer felt like a captive. She felt something else. A partner. A strange, silent, and unequal partner, but a partner nonetheless. She had survived the outlaws. She had survived the desert. She had survived his silence. She had survived the storm. The world he led her through was a brutal, majestic thing. They crossed a high plateau where the wind never stopped, a place where the mountains seemed to have been shattered by the hand of an angry god. Cale was vigilant. He had been since the fight in the canyon. He knew they were not safe. The shots, the two men who had escaped, they were a loose thread, a problem not yet solved. His eyes, which had softened in the cave, were now hard again, constantly scanning, moving, reading the land. He saw it first. It was the middle of the second day after the storm. They were in a wide, shallow basin, following the dry bed of an ancient river. Cale stopped. He did not just pull his horse to a halt. He froze. He became a statue. Lucy, riding 10 paces behind him, stopped as well.
"What is it?" she whispered.
He did not answer. He raised his hand, a silent command for her to stay. He slid from the bay, his rifle in his hand. He moved, low and fast, to the top of a small rise, a spine of rock that ran along the riverbed. He lay flat, a part of the earth. He was gone for 5 minutes. Lucy's heart became a slow, cold drum. The air was still, too still. He came back, moving just as quickly. He did not look at her. He came to her horse and grabbed the dun's bridle. His face was a mask she had not seen before. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was a cold, absolute, deadly focus. "They come," he said.
"Who?"
"The men from the fire. The first men. The ones I—" He did not finish. He did not need to.
"But you killed them. I saw—"
"More," he said. "They were not all." He was already moving, pulling her horse with his. He was running, leading them to the far side of the basin, toward a tumble of boulders. Then she saw them. They were far away, on the ridge Cale had just left, silhouetted against the sky. Not 2 men, not 3, there were at least 10. A small army. They had seen him. A puff of smoke, a high-pitched, angry wasp sound whined past her ear. A rifle shot, from an impossible distance. "They have a scout," Cale said, his voice a low growl.
"They found our tracks."
He shoved her off the horse. "Get down! Crawl!" He abandoned the horses. He grabbed the ammunition sacks and his water canteen. He pushed her toward the rocks. "We cannot fight them," she gasped, scrambling over the gravel.
"There are too many."
"We do not fight. We run. When we can. Now. We hold them." He found his place, a narrow V in the rock, a natural rifle port that looked out over the basin. He settled in. He was a man going to work. "Stay behind me," he said. "Do not move. Do not make sound. No matter what." The men were coming. They were not fools. They were not charging. They were spreading out, fanning across the basin, moving from cover to cover. They were surrounding them. The leader, a big man on a black horse, sat just out of rifle range, directing them. The first shot was Cale's. He waited. He was a creature of patience. He waited until one of the men, overconfident, rose from behind a clump of sagebrush to run to a new position. Cale's rifle spoke. The sound was sharp, definitive. The man fell and did not move. A roar of anger from the distant horsemen. Now they knew exactly where he was. The world dissolved into a chaos of noise. Bullets began to thud into the rocks around them. The air was full of whining, ricocheting lead. Chips of stone flew, stinging Lucy's face as she pressed herself into the dirt. Cale was a machine. He was not a man. He was a tool of death. He would fire, and the report of his rifle was immediately followed by a thwack as he levered a new round. He was not shooting wildly. Every shot was a calculation. Another man cried out, a high, bubbling scream. "He is just one man," a voice yelled. "Get on his flank." Cale knew it, too. This was a temporary stop. They were being pinned. "They will circle," he said, not taking his eyes from the sights. "They will come from above." He fired again. "We must go." "Go where?" she screamed over the noise. He pointed. "Back to the high pass. I can hold them there." He grabbed her. He pulled her to her feet. "When I shoot, you run to the greens. Do not look back." He raised his rifle. He fired twice, in fast succession, at the place where the fire was heaviest. "Go!" She ran as she had never run in her life. Her feet, in his moccasins, found purchase. Her legs, strong from the climb, pumped. She was not a doll. She was a deer, running for her life. She made it to the wash. She fell, sliding into the shallow ditch. Cale was right behind her. He landed beside her, his chest heaving. He was not just a machine. He was a man. He was breathing hard. "This way." He led her in a low, agonizing crouch, following the wash as it curved back toward the mountains. The bullets were still snapping over their heads. They ran for a mile. The cover of the wash grew shallower. They would be exposed. They came to the end, a rock slide. To go on, they had to climb, and they would be in the open. "I will go first," he said. "Give me cover." He did not know how to say it. "What do I do?" He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the fire. He made a decision. It was a terrible one. He took his pistol, a heavy Colt. He had taken it from the outlaws at the canyon. He pressed it into her hand. "You know, this..." She nodded. Her father had made her learn. I have shot at targets." "Good. Stay here. Shoot at their noise. Not at them. At their noise. Make them stay down." He handed her a box of shells. "You have 10 shots. Count them. Then you run." He did not wait for an answer. He was gone, climbing the rock slide, his rifle on his back. Lucy was alone. She was in a ditch with a pistol, and an army of men was coming. She heard them, shouting. They had found the horses. They knew they were on foot. "She is in the wash." Lucy raised the pistol. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold it. A man appeared at the top of the wash, not 30 yards away. He saw her. He smiled, the same terrible smile. Well, look." Lucy screamed. She did not aim. She pointed the pistol in his direction and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. It kicked her hand back, stinging her. The man was gone. He had not been hit. He had ducked. But he was afraid. She had a gun. "She has a pistol," he yelled. Lucy was crying now, tears of pure animal terror. But she held the gun. She pulled back the hammer. Cale had reached the top. He was in a nest of rocks. He turned. He was safe. He looked for her. He saw her. She was not running. She was in the wash, the pistol in her hand, facing down the men he had told her to run from. She was trying to protect him. "Lucy!" His voice was a raw, broken sound. "Run!" But it was too late. The big man on the black horse, the leader, had grown tired of this. He had circled, a long, wide path. He was on the ridge above the wash. He was above her. Cale saw him. Lucy above. She looked up. The man was there. He raised his rifle. He was aiming at her. Cale's world, which had been ice, which had been fire, now became a single point of light. Her. He did not think. He did not calculate. He did not aim. He stood up from his cover. In the open, on the top of the ridge. "Here!" he roared. It was not a word. It was a challenge. It was the cry of a bear. It was the sound of a man who had lost everything, and would not lose this. The man on the black horse turned. His target had changed. Here was the warrior, the one who had killed his men. Cale fired. The man on the horse fired. The shots were almost simultaneous. Cale felt the bullet. It was not a sting. It was a hammer. It was a white-hot fist that punched him in the chest, spinning him around, throwing him backward. He saw the sky, the deep, aching blue. He saw his wife's face. He saw his son. He hit the rocks, and the world went dark. Lucy saw it. She saw him stand. She heard his roar. She saw him fire. She saw the man on the horse. Slump. Cale's shot had been true. But she also saw Cale fall. He did not just fall. He was thrown. "No," she whispered. "No, no." The battle was over. The leader was dead. The man in the wash was forgotten. The other men, seeing their leader fall, their scout gone, their numbers thinning, did what cowards do. They hesitated. They looked at each other. This was not a fight they were winning. They began to fall back. Lucy did not see them go. She did not hear their retreat. She dropped the pistol. She ran. She climbed the rock slide, her hands raw, her nails breaking. She did not feel the pain. She got to the top. He was there. He was lying on his back, in a pool of his own blood. His eyes were closed. His rifle was 3 feet away. "Cale," she whispered. He did not move. "Cale." She touched his face. His skin was warm. But his face was still... "No," she said, her voice rising. "No, you cannot. You cannot. You stood up. You... She put her head on his chest. She was a lady. She was from Boston. She was a porcelain doll. She put her head on the bloody, bare chest of the Apache warrior, and she listened. Thump! Thump! It was there. It was slow. It was weak, a faltering, faint drum, but it was there. He was alive. She looked at the wound. It was high on his chest, near the shoulder, but it was bad. It was bleeding, a dark, steady, terrible flow. He had been hit by a heavy rifle, and it had torn him apart. He was saved. She was saved. He was dying. Lucy's world shrank to the small, terrible space he occupied on the rock. The sky, the wind, the distant, retreating sounds of the outlaws, they were nothing. There was only the man, the blood, and the faint, faltering beat beneath her ear. Thump! Thump! It was the sound of a failing engine, a clock running down. Panic was a luxury. Fear was a privilege. She had no room for them. The porcelain doll, the Boston lady, the weeping victim, they were all dead. The person who was left was a creature of pure, animal pragmatism. He was alive. She had to keep him that way. "Cale," she said, her voice sharp, not a whisper. She slapped his face, not hard, but with a stinging insistence. "Cale, you do not die." His eyelids fluttered. A groan, a low, animal sound of pain, was forced from his lips. "Good," she said, her voice shaking but hard. "You are with me. You stay with me." The wound. She had to see the wound. She tore at his shirt. The buckskin was tough, but it was already soaked and weakened. She ripped it open. It was not one hole. The bullet, a heavy-caliber rifle slug, had hit his upper chest, near the right shoulder, and it had come apart. The exit wound in his back. She could not see it, but she knew it must be there. The damage was massive. The blood was not spurting, not from an artery, but it was flowing, a steady, dark, relentless river, soaking the rock beneath him. He was dying. He was bleeding to death in front of her, and she, who had fainted at the sight of her brother's broken arm, was the only person in the world who could stop it. "No," she said again. She said it to him, to the wound, to God. "You will not?" She had to stop the blood. She ripped a long, clean strip from her own skirt, the last piece of her old life. She wadded it, pressed it into the ragged, primary wound. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound, and his body arched off the rock. His eyes flew open. They were wild, unfocused, and they did not see her. "Hold," she commanded, as much to herself as to him. She pressed down, putting all of her small weight onto the pad. The blood immediately soaked it, hot and slick over her hands. It was not enough, Tim. She looked around, her mind racing with a cold, clear desperation. His shirt. She ripped a pad from the back of it, where it was dry. She pressed that on top of the first. You must help me," she gasped, her hands shaking. I have to turn you." He was a dead weight. He was 180 pounds of solid, uncooperative muscle, and she was 110. "Cale, help me!" He was not there. He was lost, swimming in the dark. Red pain. "Damn you, help me!" she screamed, her voice breaking. The man on the ground, the man who had roared here at his own death, was gone. This was just a body, leaking its life onto the stones. She put her arms under his shoulders. She pulled. He did not move. It was like trying to pull a boulder. Tears, hot and angry, streamed down her face. You stood for me," she sobbed. You will not die for me." She tried again. She wedged her shoulder under his good one. She used her legs. With a grunt that tore from her throat, she rolled him, just slightly, onto his side. The back, it was as she feared. The bullet had ripped its way out, taking a fist-sized chunk of flesh and muscle with it. It was a crater. It was a horror. She had nothing left to stop it. She looked at her hands. They were covered in his blood. This man, this stranger, this savage, this her, whatever he was hers. She looked at his face, pale beneath the copper skin. His eyes were closed now, his breathing a shallow, wet rattle. This was not love as she had known it. This was not poetry or pianos or damp-handed boys named Arthur. This was a fire in her belly. It was a cold, hard, terrifying thing. It was the absolute, unshakable knowledge that if he died, she would, in some essential way, die too. She would be a ghost, just as he had been. "I will not be a ghost," she whispered. She looked around. The rock slide, the wash, the plants. He had chewed leaves for her feet. He had known what to do. She looked at the plants around her. They were strangers. She did not know their names, but she knew. She knew he did. She looked at the pouch on his belt, the one he had taken the leather from. She crawled to him. She left his side for just a moment. She fumbled with the tie, her bloody, shaking hands slipping. She tore it open. Inside, dried leather, a whetstone, a small, dry twist of something, it looked like tobacco, and a small, buckskin bag. She opened it. A green powder. It smelled sharp, like pine and something else, something bitter. She did not know what it was, but he carried it. It was his medicine. She ran back to him. He was still breathing. She took the canteen from his belt, his canteen. She poured a little of the precious water into her own hand, the one that was slightly cleaner. She mixed the green powder. It became a thick, dark, pungent paste. She did not hesitate. This was no time for Boston sensibilities. She looked at the wound. She took a breath, and with her fingers, she packed the paste into the terrible, gaping hole in his back. He screamed. It was not a groan. It was a full-bodied, tearing, animal roar of agony. His entire body convulsed, throwing her backward. He was awake. He was on his side, his eyes wide and blazing. and he was looking at her, and he was full of a terrible primal rage.
You,
he gasped, his hand flying to his knife.
I am saving you,
She shrieked, falling back, her hands held up.
You are bleeding. It is medicine.
He stared at her. The rage in his eyes warred with a profound, agonized confusion. He saw her face, streaked with his blood and her tears. He saw her, not as a burden, not as a captive. He saw her, fighting for him. His hand fell away from the knife. His body slumped. The fire in his eyes went out, replaced by a vast, terrible exhaustion.
It burns,
he whispered. The words were a dry rattle.
Yes,
she said, her voice shaking.
Yes, it must.
She crawled back to him. He did not fight her. He was too weak. She packed the front wound, the one over his chest, with the same terrible paste. He groaned, a low, constant sound, but he let her. It was not enough. She had to bind him. She had to hold him together. She used the rest of his shirt. She used the rest of her skirt. She tore them into long, long strips. She had to get him to sit up. Cale, you must sit. He just looked at her, his eyes dull. Cale, sit up. I have to wrap you. She got behind him. She put her arms under his.
Now, on 3, you push, I pull.
He tried. She saw the muscles in his neck strain. It was a pathetic, failed attempt. She would not be denied. She put her back against a rock and pulled him, inch by agonizing inch, until his back was resting against her, his body slumped forward. He was hot, a terrible, feverish heat. She took the strips of cloth, and she began to wrap him. It was an intimacy beyond anything she could have imagined. Her arms were around him. Her hands, covered in his blood and his medicine, were moving over his skin. She was touching the hard, scarred planes of his chest, his back. She saw the old scars, white and silver against his copper skin, scars from bullets, scars from knives, scars from a life she could not even. And she was holding him. She was binding him. She wrapped him, pulling the cloth as tight as she could, creating a pressure bandage to hold the poultice in, to hold the life in. Her arms were around him. Her face was in his hair. It smelled of him, of sweat and rain, and the sharp, green smell of the paste. She was no longer a stranger. She was no longer a white woman. She was the only thing in the world holding this man together. He was conscious. Barely. He was leaning against her, his head on her shoulder. He was too weak to hold it up.
It is cold,
he whispered, his voice a thread. The fever was a lie. The heat was a fire. But the blood loss was an ice. He was going into shock. She held him. She was all he had. No, she said, I am here. She could not stay on the rock slide. The men, they were gone, but they might come back. And the sun, it was beginning to set. The cold would come, and the cold would kill him.
We have to move, she said.
He did not respond.
Cale, we have to move. To shelter.
Where is shelter? He moved his head, a fractional, weak movement. He gestured with his chin, back to the small nest of rocks he had been in. It was 10 yards away. It might as well have been a mile. All right, she said. She was a different woman. She was not a doll. She was a mule. She was an ox. She was whatever she had to be. All right, we are going to stand. She did not know how, but she knew she would. She got her feet under her. She put her arms around his waist, pulling him tight against her. His arm, his good arm, was slung over her shoulder.
Now,
she grunted. She pushed with her legs. He tried. He pushed. A small, weak effort. They stood. They stood for 1 second. A swaying, impossible tableau. A half-dead man, held up by a half-starved woman, both of them covered in blood. Then they took a step. It was a nightmare. It was a shuffling, grotesque, agonizing journey. Every step, he groaned. Every step, her muscles screamed. She was carrying his weight. She was carrying her own. She was carrying both their lives. 1 step. "Good," she panted. Another step. He stumbled. They almost went down. She held him, her knees buckling. "No, we do not fall. We do not." She got them to the rocks. It was a small, 3-sided cleft. It was shelter. It was a grave, but it was out of the wind. She lowered him. It was not gentle. She collapsed, and he fell with her. He was on the ground, his eyes closed, but he was breathing. She had done it. She was not done. The sun was gone. The purple, high-country twilight was coming. The air was already cold. Fire! He would die without fire. She had his pack. She had his fire-starting kit. She had watched him. She fumbled with the flint and steel. Her hands were shaking, not with fear, but with exhaustion. She could not make a spark. "No, no, no, no!" She took a breath. She did it again. His way, slow, patient. A spark. It caught in the tinder. A tiny, glowing ember. She blew on it, gently, gently, her own life breath. It caught. She had a fire, a small, weak, pathetic fire. But it was a fire. She fed it twigs. She fed it scraps of dry brush. She looked at him. He was shivering, a violent, rattling tremor that shook his whole body. She had done all she could. The wound was packed. The fire was lit. It was not enough. She looked at the fur bedroll. It was still tied to her saddle. Her saddle. The horses. They were gone. No, they were not. They were scattered. But they were horses. They would not go far. She could not leave him. She took his blanket, the one he had given her in the cave. It was in his pack. She covered him with it. He was still shivering. There was only one thing left. She was not a lady. She was a woman. She lay down beside him, on the cold, hard rock. She put her back to the fire, and she pulled his body against hers. She put her arms around him. She pulled him tight, his back to her chest. She put her legs against his. She was wrapping him in herself. He was a furnace. His fever was raging, but he was shivering. He groaned. He was not conscious. "Shh," she whispered, her mouth in his hair. "I am here. It is all right. I am here." She was a small, weak, civilized woman. He was a large, strong, savage man. And she was his only warmth. She was his only life. They were not strangers. They were not two people. They were in that cold, dark, bloody cleft in the rock. One person. They were one being, clinging to life. She held him, her eyes wide, staring at the small fire. She held him as the stars came out, cold and white and indifferent. She held him, and she knew. She was in love. It was a terrible, painful, and glorious thing. It was the most real thing she had ever known. And she would not let him go. The night was a fever. It was a descent into a dark, red-tinged world where time had no meaning. Cale Red Bear was not in the cleft of rock. He was in the past. He was running, his lungs burning, the smell of smoke and gunfire thick in his throat. He could hear his wife, Tasha, calling his name. He could hear his son, Little Hawk, crying. He ran, but his feet were lead. The blue-coated soldiers were everywhere, their faces blank and merciless. He had to get to them. He had to guard them. He failed. He opened his eyes. The world was cold. The pain was a white-hot fire in his chest. A face was above him. It was not Tasha. It was a stranger. A pale, wild-eyed woman, her face smeared with his blood, her hair a tangled mat. She was whispering, her voice a desperate, rhythmic sound. "I am here. It is all right. I am here." He was cold, so cold. He was shivering, his body a traitor, shaking itself apart. The woman, she pulled him closer. Her body was small, but it was warm, a single small point of heat in a universe of ice. He was so tired, he let the darkness take him. Lucy did not sleep. She held him. She fed the fire, twig by tiny twig. She held the man who had roared at his own death, and she felt the terrible, racking shivers that tore through him. His fever was a dry, consuming heat, but the shock, the blood loss, was a polar cold. She was trying to warm a stone that was being frozen from the inside. She was not a lady. She was a furnace. She poured her own small, vital heat into him. When the sun finally touched the rim of the rocks, she was still awake. He was still breathing. The shallow, wet rattle had eased. His breathing was deeper now, but it was ragged. He was in a deep, fevered sleep. His skin was on fire. The green paste, it had burned him. It had sealed him. But the real fight was beginning. The fight inside. She knew this. She knew, with a certainty that came from some new, deep place, that the bullet was one enemy, the wound was another, and the fever was the true army. She could not move. She was pinned by his weight, but she had to.
"Cale,"
she whispered.
I have to get up, just for a moment."
He did not respond. He was a dead weight. She extricated herself, slowly, her own muscles screaming in protest. She had been a tense, knotted bundle of human warmth all night, and now she was as stiff and sore as he was. She laid his blanket back over him. He did not stir. She was alone, on a high rocky pass, with a dying man. First, water. The canteens. His was empty. Hers. She had half a canteen left. She had used the rest to mix the paste. She looked at him. His lips were already cracking. She gave him a sip. She had to lift his head, her arm under his neck. He coughed, a terrible, wet sound, but he swallowed. "Good," she whispered. "You drink?" She wet a scrap of her torn dress and wiped his face. The sun was climbing. It was getting warm, but she knew the cold would come again. Firewood, water, food, in that order. She left him. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. She left him, lying in the cleft, and stepped out onto the rock slide. The world was vast and empty. The outlaws were gone. She was alone. She gathered wood, dead, dry branches of juniper, scraps of brush. She made a pile, a dragon's hoard of fuel. Water. She had to find the horses. They were their only way to anywhere. And they had the water bags. She took his rifle. It was impossibly heavy. She held it, the wood smooth, the metal cold. This was the tool he had used, the tool that had killed, the tool that had saved her. She found the horses. It took an hour. They had not gone far. They were grazing, huddled together, in a small patch of green where a spring seeped from the rock. "Water," she cried. She sat on the ground, the heavy rifle across her knees, and she cried, silent, racking sobs of sheer, profound relief. She filled the canteens. She filled the heavy canvas water bag. She led the two horses, the bay and the dun, back to the cleft. She tied them, close, where she could see them. She was a provider. She went back to Cale. He had not moved, but his breathing was faster. The fever was climbing. She had to clean the wound. She built up the fire. She put water in the small tin pot he used for coffee. She boiled it. She tore more strips from her ruined dress. Her last piece of civilization. She boiled the strips. She knelt beside him.
"Cale, this This will hurt. I am sorry. I am so sorry.
He was not there. She unwrapped him, her own bandage, the one she had put on in the desperate, bloody dark. It was soaked. It was stuck. She had to pull it off. She did. She pulled, and the terrible, green, herbal paste came with it, pulling at his skin. He screamed. It was the same broken, animal sound. His body arched, his eyes flew open, but they were blind. He was fighting, but not her. He was fighting the pain.
I am sorry,
she wept, her hands slick again.
I am sorry.
The wound it was a thing from a nightmare. It was red, swollen, angry. The edges were a dark, bruised purple. But it was not foul. The green paste, whatever it was, it had seared the wound. It had held. She cleaned it with the hot, boiled water and the clean strips of cloth. She was not a lady. She was a nurse. She was a doctor. She was a woman. She put on a new poultice. She had found the bag. She had found the leaf he used. She chewed it. Her mouth was filled with the bitter, sharp taste. She did not care. She made a fresh poultice and she packed it.
He did not scream this time. He just passed out.
She rewrapped him, her movements surer now. She sat back on her heels. She was covered in his sweat, his blood. She had done it. For 3 days, this was her life. Her world was the cleft of rock. Her world was the body of the man. Her clock was his fever. She would leave for an hour at a time. She took the rifle. She hunted. The first day, she shot at a rabbit and missed. The explosion of the rifle, so close to her face, made her fall backward. She wept in frustration. The second day, she did not miss. She did not kill it clean. It screamed. She had to finish it. She did with a rock, her eyes closed, her stomach heaving. She brought it back. She skinned it, her hands clumsy, her knife work a grotesque parody of his. But she did it. She cooked it. She made a broth. She fed him. She lifted his head, and she spooned the hot, weak broth into his mouth. "You eat," she commanded him. He swallowed. And she ate, too. She ate the stringy, scorched meat. She was a survivor. On the third night, the fever broke. She had been holding him, as she had every night. He was a raging furnace, and she was terrified he would simply burn up from the inside. He was thrashing, muttering words she could not understand. Apache, words of battle, words of love. He called a name. Tasha. It was a knife in her heart. But she held him. "Shh," she whispered, her own heart breaking.
"I am here. It is Lucy. I am here."
Then, just before dawn, he stopped thrashing. He just stopped. The heat, the raging furnace, it went out. He was cold. "No," she said. "No, Cale." She grabbed his face. He was not hot. He was cool. And he was sweating. A drenching, sudden sweat. He was not dead. He was... His eyes opened. And they were not the eyes of the fever. They were not the eyes of the warrior. They were not the eyes of the ghost. They were his. They were Cale's. And he was looking at her. He saw her. He saw a woman. Her hair was a wild, filthy tangle. Her face was gaunt, her eyes huge and bruised with exhaustion. She was covered in dirt, dried blood, and she was beautiful. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She was his guardian. She was his life. "Lucy," he whispered. His voice was a dry, broken piece of rock. She collapsed. She did not faint. She just all the strength that had held her up for 3 days. It left. She fell onto his chest, and she began to sob. She wept, not for her brother, not for her old life. She wept because he had said her name. He did not have the strength to lift his arm. It was a terrible, profound weakness. He could not move, but he could feel. He could feel her, her tears hot on his chest, her small, thin body draped over his. He had built a wall of ice to keep this very thing out, this feeling, this terrible, painful, glorious connection. He had sworn he would never feel this again. To love was to die. To love was to lose. And he had been right. He had died. He had stood up. He had called death to himself to save her. And she had not let him. She had pulled him back. "You," he rasped. "You chewed the leaf." She lifted her head. Her face was a ruin. I did not know what else to do." "You," he tried to laugh. It was a horrible, choking sound. "You hit the rabbit with a rock." He had been awake. He had been in the dark. He had heard her. He had heard her fail. He had heard her succeed. He had heard her crying. He had heard her living. "You saved me," he said. This was the truth. It was the simple, impossible truth. He, the warrior, the survivor, the man of stone. He had been saved by the porcelain doll. They stayed there, in the high, clean, cold air, for another week. He healed. He healed in the way of his people. Quickly, brutally. His body was a tool that had been broken, and now it was mending. But he was weak. He, Cale Redbear, who could walk for 50 miles, who could climb the sheer rock. He could not stand. She fed him. She cleaned him. She changed his bandages. The wound now a dark, healing, terrible scar. And she talked. She did not talk as she had in the cave. A confession. She just talked. She told him about the horses. She told him about the color of the sky. She told him about a book she had read once, about a man who sailed the seas. And he listened. He was a man who had not heard a human voice in 3 years, and now he lived for the sound of hers. When he was strong enough to sit up, the real choice came. He looked at his hands. They were thin. The calluses were soft. He was weak. She was strong. She was shining. The desert had not broken her. It had forged her, just as it had forged him. They were the same. "You must go," he said. His voice was stronger. She was by the fire, cleaning his rifle. She had taken it as her own task. She looked up. Her eyes were that same, clear blue. "Go where, Cale?" "South, to your people, your piano." She looked at him. She did not smile. "My people, they are not here. My piano, it is a piece of wood. It cannot keep you warm. It cannot hunt." I am Apache," he said. It was a hard, painful thing to say. This is my world. It is not yours." "It is now," she said simply. She went back to cleaning the rifle. He looked at her, at the curve of her back, at the strength in her hands. He had lived a life of solitude, a life of memory. He was a guardian of a grave, his wife, his son. He had built his life around their memory. To accept this woman, it felt like a betrayal. It felt like forgetting them. He had sacrificed himself for her. That was the warrior's way. He had not planned on living. And now he had to choose. He could send her away. He was strong enough. He could give her a horse, point her south. She would make it. She was a survivor. And he could go back. He could go back to his mesa, to his sacred spring. He could go back to his ghosts. He could be a living man, dead, or... He looked at her. She was life. She was a new, strange, and terrifying life. She was not Tasha. She was Lucy. He learned, in that long, silent afternoon, a new, hard truth. Love was not just sacrifice. He had done that. He had stood up. Love was acceptance. It was forgiveness. He had to forgive himself for living, for failing, for wanting this. And he had to accept her, a white woman, a stranger, a person who did not belong. But she did belong. She had earned her place. She had fought for it. She had fought him for it. She had fought for him. "Lucy," he said. She looked up. The green paste. My mother, she taught me. It is called mountain's breath." She smiled. It was the first time he had seen her truly smile. It was the sun, coming out from behind the storm. "Mountain's breath?" she said, testing the word. It is a good name." "My spring," he said. "It is north. 2 days. It is safe." She waited. "Will you?" he said. It was the hardest thing he had ever said. "Will you come with me?" She stood up. She walked over to him. She knelt in front of him, so her eyes were level with his. "Cale Redbear," she said, her voice soft, but as strong as steel. "You are a fool. I have with you all this time." She put her hand on his face. Her hand, no longer a doll's hand. Her hand, calloused and strong. "We," she said, "we go." He looked at her. He saw her. His. He had lost his family. He had found another. He had chosen life. He had chosen her. The journey north was a slow, painful pilgrimage. The man who had been a shadow, a force of nature, was now a burden of flesh and blood. Cale Redbear, who had moved over this land like a hunting wolf, was now a passenger. Getting him on the horse was the first ordeal. He could sit, but standing was a dizzy, gasping affair. Lucy, all 110 pounds of her, had to become a crutch, a support. She put her shoulder under his good arm. "Now, Cale," she said, her voice the one she used to gentle the horses. "Together." He leaned on her, the full, heavy weight of him. He gritted his teeth, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He hated this. He hated the weakness, the reliance. He was a warrior, and he was being lifted by a woman half his size. She, who had once been terrified of his strength, now pitied his lack of it. "Do not be a fool," she said, her voice sharp, but not unkind. "You are hurt. You let me help." He looked at her, and in his dark, pain-filled eyes, she saw a new, unfamiliar thing. Surrender. Not defeat. Surrender. He let her. She got him to the bay. He could not lift his leg. She cupped her hands, a crude stirrup. "Up," she commanded. He used her as a step, and with a groan that was half pain, half humiliation, he hauled himself into the saddle. He sat there, slumped, his head down, breathing heavily. She did not coddle him. She checked his bandages, the tight-wrapped cloth that was her handiwork. She handed him the reins. "You will ride, I will lead." She took the dun, loading it with their few supplies. She put his heavy rifle, the one she had come to know, into his own saddle scabbard, and she took the lead rope of his bay. For 2 days, she led him. It was a reverse of their first journey. She was the leader. She was the guardian. She walked, her moccasined feet sure on the rock, and she watched. She watched the ridges. She watched the sky. She carried the heavy pistol on her own hip, and she was not afraid to use it. She had become what he was. He, in turn, was forced to be what she had been, a watcher, a passenger. He saw the land in a new way, not as a map of threats and resources, but as a slow, unfolding, beautiful, and terrible thing. He saw the hawk she pointed to. He saw the way she found the hidden spring, the one he had taught her to look for. He saw her. He saw the strength in her back. He saw the determined set of her jaw. He saw her small, calloused hands. He saw the woman who had chewed the mountain's breath, the woman who had, he knew with a terrible, shaming certainty, hit a rabbit with a rock. A small, dry sound escaped him. It was a cough, a rasp. She turned, her hand flying to the pistol.
What?
He said, his voice a piece of gravel.
The rabbit.
You did not shoot it again. She stopped. She looked at him. His face was pale, his wound was in agony, and he was making a jest, a small, weak, a patchy jest. She did not smile, but her eyes, the blue, clear eyes he had come to see as his only sky, softened. We needed to eat, and you were a terrible teacher. He nodded.
I will be better.
They did not speak again for a mile, but the silence was no longer a wall. It was a shared space. When they came to the hidden pass, the one he had carried her through, she looked at him. He could not climb this, not on foot. He could not be carried. There is another way, he whispered, longer, but flat. He guided her. He was the voice. She was the body. Together, they were one functional person. They moved around the base of the mesa, a long 3-hour ride, to a narrow, eroded canyon. Here, he said. She pushed aside the vines. The same vines he had pushed aside, and she led the horses in. When she saw the spring, she stopped. The last time she was here, she was a broken, terrified, half-starved creature. She had been a captive. Now, she was coming home. The canyon was as she remembered. The clear, impossible pool, the ancient, green cottonwood, the ferns, the silence, the peace. Cale, she whispered. He had slid from the horse. He was on his feet, barely, his hand on the bay's neck for support. He was not looking at the spring. He was looking at her. This is it, he said. It is beautiful, she said. It is, he started. He was looking at the pool. It is where my son, he learned to swim. Lucy's heart stopped. The ghosts! She was bringing him to his ghosts! Cale, she said, her voice full of a pain he had never heard from her. We do not. We can go somewhere else. He turned to her. He, the warrior, the killer, the ghost. His face was a ruin of pain and weakness and a new terrible, dawning love. No, he said. He took a step, a faltering, weak step, away from the horse, away from his past. He took a step toward her. They are, he looked at the water. They are at peace. He looked at her. Now, so am I. He had not come here to die. He had come here to live. He had brought her, the living, to the place of the dead, and she, by her presence, was making it. Alive again. He collapsed. It was not dramatic. His legs just gave way. She was there before he hit the ground. She caught him, easing his fall. She was so strong. The next weeks were a new life. They were the life that began after the end of the world. His healing was a slow, frustrating business. He was a man of action, and he was forced into stillness. He sat, his back against the rock wall of the small, dry cave behind the ferns, and he He watched. He watched Lucy. She was a whirlwind. She was not a doll. She was a settler. She was a homemaker. She was a wife. She did not rest. She took the small, hidden camp, his bare, functional, male space, and she made it a home. She gathered grasses, the long, soft ones from the canyon floor. She wove them into mats for the cold, stone floor. She found, in his small pouch, a single, cherished bone needle, Tasha's. He saw her with it, and his throat closed. She saw him watching. She put it down. I am sorry. I was mending. He held out his hand, his scarred, thin hand. She gave it to him. He looked at it. She would, like you. Lucy did not know what to say. She just put her hand on his. You keep it, he said. It is, kale, she said. It needs to sow, he said. It is not a ghost. He was letting it go. He was giving her his past. She took it, and she mended his shirt. He watched her move. She learned the land. She would go out. She would take his knife. She would come back. Her skirt full of edible roots. He had taught her in those few days on the trail, and she had listened. He taught her more. He could not hunt, but he could talk. It was a new thing, the words. The root, he would say, his voice growing stronger every day. The one with the blue flower. It is good. You boil it. And the red one. No, he said, a small, almost smile. The red one. It makes you see things that are not there. Like ghosts, she asked, her voice soft. He looked at her. No, worse, like Boston. She laughed. It was a real, true, clear sound, like the spring water. He had made her laugh. He had not heard laughter. In so long. He wanted to hear it again. He began to work. He could not hunt, but his hands were strong. He took the piece of wood, the one he had been carving. He did not know, a stick. Now he knew. He sat, his back against the rock, and he carved. He carved her a spoon. It was not pretty. It was thick. It was strong. It was a spoon. He gave it to her. She was cooking. She was making a stew, rabbit stew. She had learned to set snares. He had taught her how. She looked at the spoon. She cried. It is just a spoon, he said, alarmed. It is, she said, wiping her eyes. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion. It not a kiss of a husband. It was a kiss of a friend, a partner. It was on his forehead. It was warm. The canyon of the sacred spring was no longer a secret, for there was no one left to keep it from. It was no longer a refuge, for the war was over. It was simply a home. 5 years had passed since the day she had led him back, a broken, bleeding man, to the place of his ghosts. The time had moved not in days or weeks, but in seasons, in the slow, steady turning of the earth. The small, dry cave behind the ferns, his old, cold lair, was now a pantry. It was filled with the smell of smoked meat, dried herbs, and corn. Against the flat, warm rock wall, a house now stood. Cale had built it, stone by stone, log by log. It was not a large house. It had one room, but the walls were thick, the roof was sound, and it held the warmth of the fire. Inside, it was her world. It was not the yellow room in Boston. There was no piano, but there was a warmth that room had never known. The floors, once bare rock, were covered in the woven grass mats she had made, soft and fragrant underfoot. In the corner, 2 small beds, built by Cale, were piled high with soft, cured rabbit furs. A rough-hewn table, his work, stood in the center, bearing the 3-legged pot she cooked in, and on the wall, hung from a wooden peg, was a small, cracked, silver-backed mirror. He had traded 3 perfect fox skins for it, a moment of profound, unspoken, and unnecessary luxury. Cale Redbear stood by the pool. The morning sun had just begun to touch the water. He was strong again. The terrible, puckered map of the scar on his chest and back was a part of him now, a reminder of the price of life. He was no longer the ghost. The ice had been melted, not just by the fever, but by the slow, steady, daily warmth of a life shared. He had been a man who lived only in the past. Now, he only looked forward. He was waiting, his head tilted, listening. The sound came, the sound that had retaught him how to breathe. It was not the shriek of a hawk or the whisper of the wind. It was the sound of a small child laughing, a high, clear, uncomplicated noise. A boy, 4 years old, burst from the cabin door. He was a perfect, small copy of his father, a miniature warrior. He had the same straight, shoulder-length black hair, the same deep copper skin, the same dark, intelligent, and serious eyes. He wore only a small, deerskin breechclout, and his feet were bare on the sand. Already tough, he ran, not to the water, but to Cale. "Father," the boy said. The word was clear, confident. Cale turned. The smile that had once been a forgotten thing now came easily. It transformed his hard face, lit it from within. He reached down and swung the boy high, onto his shoulders. "Hawk," Cale said. His voice was no longer a rasp, but a low, warm rumble. "The sun is up. The traps must be checked." "I saw a deer," the boy said, his voice full of importance. "A big one, on the high ridge." "He is like his father," a voice said, full of soft amusement. Lucy came to the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron made of supple, creamy deer hide. She was, he thought, a miracle. She was not the gaunt, wild creature he had found. She was not the pale, porcelain doll from Boston. She was a woman, in the full, strong bloom of her life. Her sun-gold hair was braided, a thick, practical, and shining rope. Her skin, no longer scorched, was lightly tanned. Her blue eyes were clear, and they held a deep, abiding, and powerful peace. She was holding a smaller child, a girl of 2, who was a perfect, small copy of her. The girl had her mother's pale, wispy hair and her father's quiet, watchful, unblinking eyes. "He has been waiting for you since the sky was gray," Lucy said, moving toward him. She kissed the boy on the head, and then she touched Cale's arm. It was a small, everyday gesture of possession, of belonging. "He is impatient," Cale said, looking at his wife. He had learned, from her, the language of the small jest. "He is like his father," Lucy replied, her voice soft. "He wants to do everything, now." This was their life, a life built of small, daily, repeated actions. He was a father he had never thought he would be again. The first loss had almost broken him. He had been terrified to love this new boy, this new hawk. He had been afraid it was a betrayal. But Lucy had known. "He is not, little hawk," she had said to him one night, when he had pulled away from holding the new baby. "He is not a ghost. Cale, he is a new life, your life. It is all right to love him." And she was right. He was his own person. Cale taught the boy the ways of the land, not the ways of war. The war was over. He taught him the names of the plants, the mountain's breath, the water root. He taught him how to read the sky. He taught him how to set a snare. He taught him how to listen to the rocks. And Lucy taught the girl Willow. She taught her the songs her own mother had taught her, the English words strange and beautiful in the Red Rock Canyon. She taught her how to sew with the bone needle, Tasha's needle. She taught her how to make the bread, a rough, strong bread made from the cornmeal they traded for. They were not a forgotten people. They were a new people. They were in this small, hidden place, a strong community of 4. Once every 3 moons, Cale would ride east. He would ride for 2 days. To the trading post. It was run by a man named Silas, a man who had lost his own family to smallpox, a man who asked no questions. Cale would trade, his perfect, tanned deer hides, the ones Lucy helped him scrape and cure. Her hands, once so soft, now strong and calloused and capable. He would trade for salt, for coffee, for cornmeal, for steel traps, for a new axe head. He was no longer a ghost. He was a provider, a husband, a man. He had learned to speak again, not just in the short commands. He had learned to talk. He would sit by the fire, his son on his knee, his daughter in Lucy's lap, and he would tell them stories. He told them of the coyote, the clever, foolish one. He told them of the hawk, the clear-eyed one. He did not tell them of the blue-coated soldiers. He did not tell them of the fire or the blood. His ghosts were at peace. And Lucy, she learned to listen to the silence. She learned to hear the voice of the wind, the language of the stone. She learned to be still. She no longer needed the noise of Boston. She no longer needed the pianos. One evening, in the late fall, when the air was crisp and the cottonwood leaves had turned a brilliant, burning gold, they sat by the fire. The children were asleep, 2 small, warm bundles in their fur beds. Cale was carving. His hands were never idle. He was carving a small, wooden hawk for his son. His skill was greater now. The lines were sure. Lucy was sewing. She was making a new shirt for Hawk, a winter shirt, from a soft, white rabbit skin. Her stitches were small and even. The silence between them was not an empty space. It was a warm, shared blanket. "They will not write you," Cale said, his voice quiet. Lucy looked up. "Who?" "Your people, the railroad man." They had talked of this. Once. She had told him her father would search, that her world would be looking for her. That was 5 years ago. "No," she said, her voice soft. "They will not. They had a service, a funeral, for the lost girl, the porcelain doll. She died in the desert." He looked at her. "She is gone," Lucy said. She touched the bone needle to her lip. "The woman who lives here, she is not her." She was not Lucy Westbrook, the daughter of the railroad. She was Lucy Red Bear. She was the woman who had hit a rabbit with a rock. She was the woman who had chewed the mountain's breath. Cale put down his carving. He reached out his hand, his large, scarred, warrior's hand. She put hers in it, her small, strong, maker's hand. His fingers closed around hers. This was their community. This was their strength. It was a bond forged in blood and fear, and healed with water and time. He was a man who had been saved from a living death. She was a woman who had been saved from a living prison. He, the Apache warrior, had lost his world. She, the Boston lady, had lost hers. And here in this high, lonely, sacred place, they had found a new one, together. He looked at her, his wife, his partner, his life. She looked at him, her husband, her guardian, her heart. They did not need to speak. They had been born in the fire, and they had been reborn in the water. And it was good. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment below and let us know where you are listening from. We would love to connect and share our thoughts. We invite you to subscribe to our channel Wild West Tales, like this video, and support us further by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.